Take your Bibles, please, and turn to Acts chapter 18. Okay, let me see if I turn this on here. Acts 18. Yeah, okay, Acts chapter 18. We are in Acts 18 about 1 or 2 years past the events of this morning. Okay, just time-wise. That'll come up towards the end of the message about timing. So about 2 years, 1 to 2 years after the events of chapter 16. Okay? Now, can we all agree that women are just different than guys, right? You heard the old, it's supposed to be a joke, I think. If you heard is it the book Men Are From Mars and Women From Venus? Is that the title? The old book, women and the other guy said, well, if you've heard the title, you've read the book, okay? So it's just women and men are different, okay? And they are different, okay, in many different ways. But I found this morning, or today, in researching this message about women this week, that women are different in that it takes them, don't do anything with this, okay? But it takes them less effort, physical effort, to speak. It is, in other words, if a man exercises 3 bars of energy to say something, okay, a woman can say it in about 1 bar, okay? Which, because the women say this because we're so smart. We don't have to use as many words. I don't know if they say that or not. But the reason, here's the reason, because women's vocal cords are shorter than men's. Okay, and they can speak without using as much energy. Now you can take that and go any ways you want with it, but don't do it right now. Okay, wait until you go home and you've given your wife a nice dessert or something and told how much you loved her. Then if you want to joke about it, you can. But it's just one of the many different ways that guys and gals are different. Okay, and yet one way in which they are similar is that they are instruments of God's grace to the world around them when they let God use them. They are an illustration of the body of Christ in real time. And I want to give you some references to write down. I'm not going to turn these other different references, but I want you to write them down, okay? But 1 Corinthians 11, verse 5 says, "But every woman that prayeth or prophesieth with her head uncovered dishonoreth her head." Now, there are people who go to 1 Corinthians 11:5 and say, see, there, women can preach and women can be pastors. And that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about there are women who pray in public, and there are women, there's nothing wrong with women praying in public. It's not wrong, okay, obviously. And in a women's class, for example, if a woman doesn't pray in public, nobody prays, okay? And she can teach. Prophesying here is in the context of teaching the Word of God. This morning, we had a ladies' class, okay, and that class was being taught, and Karen has a class that she teaches, and the others of you ladies have taught classes and all that going on, okay? So you have the teaching goes. In Titus chapter 2, in verses 3 and 4, it says, "And let the aged women teach the younger women to be sober, to love their husbands, and to love their children." So women have a tremendous part in public ministry. They do. And they do have an important part in ministry from women to women. Okay, very important part to encourage each other in the things of the Lord. 1 Timothy chapter 2, though, says, Romans 16. Romans 16:1 says, "I commend to thee Phoebe, our sister, which is a servant of Christ," which is in Centra. Okay, and of course that word servant is the same Greek word. It's translated deacon, and people say here are deaconesses, and so women can be deacons. Now, there are churches, very fundamental churches, particularly in the northeast or north central part of our country, that tend to have deaconesses, okay? Now, in those churches, the fundamental churches that I'm aware of, their deaconesses are what we would refer to as our kitchen team, because most of those, I think, are women who do the kitchen team, not because guys can't, but that's just the way it is. They're groups of ladies who just serve in different kinds of ministry. They are not deaconesses in the sense of having a leadership position in a church. And so, of course, the question comes up, then why not? Okay, now I want to just show you that the Bible talks about women being greatly used of God, but there's some limitations. Now, why is that? Well, 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 12 says, I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over a man, but to be in silence. But the word silence there is in the context of teaching or having authority over a man. And the reason is laid out in verses 13, 14, and 15. Okay? The Bible talks about there are two reasons for the moratorium that God instructed about women not being pastors or being leaders over men in the context of a local church. That's the context of 1 Timothy. It's not the context of the United States government. So you can't take that verse and say a woman could not be president. Okay, we were joking about Margaret Thatcher this morning. Many people back in the day that knew of Margaret Thatcher in that time period. Her leadership was much like Ronald Reagan's, and if you liked, the person would like Ronald Reagan's leadership, they would like that kind of political leadership. That's just the way it was, okay? So you can't take that position. You can't say, well, you know, in a company, a woman can't have a company. Like Lydia had a company. Lydia was the head of a corporation. Now, how big it was, we don't know, but she had her own company, her own business, okay? But in the church, it is different. And so when you go into 2 Timothy chapter 3 and you see the qualifications of the pastor and deacons, those are qualifications only a man can fulfill. Okay? Now, we'll tell you that over the years of ministry, I've really only had one woman to really push back on the whole women teaching men thing. Okay? And that was more, I think, out of ignorance and tradition than anything else. Okay? But when we started our church, and ever since then, when women understand that we're trying to challenge the men to be the spiritual leaders in their home and in their church, they love it. They love it when men take the spiritual leadership that they should take. And that's a real convicting reality for all of us men, okay? Now, let's talk about our text, okay, in these few verses about Priscilla. Who was Priscilla, of course? This is about 50 A.D., and she is married to who? Who's her husband? Aquila. Interesting name, you know, like Tweedledee, Tweedledum, and just the Aquila, how it sort of rhymes, has a rhyming to it of going together. And her husband, of course, is Jewish. And so you have this event. Now, what happens is they come as a couple to Corinth, and then they wind up in Ephesus. And in the few verses we have here, I want to draw to you three observations about her particular life as a godly woman in a locale that formed churches, okay? Now you have to understand, all the churches were house churches because there's no buildings, okay? And second of all, since most of the Christians, a large percentage of the Christians were slaves, they didn't get Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. In other words, if they're going to meet on the first day of the week, most likely they're meeting either very early in the morning or very late at night, okay? They don't get the day off from their master's work to go to church, all right? And so, and there's house churches because back in the day, even if we were living on the Outer Banks in 1903, when the Wright brothers were here, Stillwater's would never exist as it is now. Because back then it was like a 7-hour or a multiple hour, not 7, but a multiple hour trip, usually, from Southern Shores, what is it now, Southern Shores, to Central Nags Head. It was a major event. You weren't going to go probably in the morning and come back even in the afternoon because of the limited transportation and everything else. So it just was a different kind of world, okay? So, and that's why people who say, well, all these churches had multiple elders, well, these house churches would work together, but there weren't like, 1,000 people or 100 people attending this one house, that just wasn't practical, but they had these groups, okay? So the point is that they were used of God. So I'm going to give you three things to think about when you think about Priscilla. Here's the first one in the time we have. First of all, she was given to overcoming the past. She's an example of someone who overcomes the past in verses 1 to 3. Now, what happened to her and her husband? Now, I will say this to you, okay? Many of you know the trauma that Karen and I went through before we came to the Outer Banks to start Still Waters. And if you don't, it's of no consequence right now other than to say that we had some trauma in our life, okay? And I will tell you, I talked to a pastor yesterday, a retired pastor, who left the ministry prematurely because when he went through his trauma, it was a different kind of trauma, but a trauma nonetheless, okay? His wife did not respond like Karen did. Karen's response to the trauma is probably the single, God did it, but the thing that made it possible for us to move forward, because she didn't get bitter, she didn't get angry, she didn't even get even, okay? She took it from the Lord and with great grace and with great spiritual maturity. And her stability, while God was teaching me a lot of things about emotions and all of that, was instrumental. And here, I don't want to read into the text, it's not there. It doesn't tell us exactly about their marital relationship. But she's named every time he's named as far as being used of God, and she's right there with him with this transition. Look at verse 1. And after these things, Paul departs, and he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, which with his wife Priscilla, because, look at this little note, because that Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome. Now, why were they there's not an exact, cloudy somewhat reason, maybe why did he cause this? Some believe it was because, and I'm not sure this is definitively determined in historical records, because you have to remember, of course, records are limited, that possibly because, remember, Christianity initially was considered a subsect of Judaism, okay? So it was like you had the Jews, you had the Sadducees, and the Pharisees, and the Stoics and other, but then you had the Christians, they're just part of that same group. And so possibly it was because they were causing a controversy in Rome, because remember, they would not worship Caesar, okay? So maybe because of that. But for whatever reason was, they were established there and they had to leave. They were tent makers, okay? We won't dive into that because of time constraints tonight. But we notice two things about them. First of all, she dealt with blessings that were lost. She had blessings that were lost. She lost. Rome was the place to live. Rome was again, in our secular culture, is the New York City, is the Chicago, is the Las Vegas or Los Angeles. It's a big city. It's a place to go. And so now Corinth from Rome, it's not like going from New York City in 1910 to Hatteras. It's not like that. It's more like going from New York City in 1910 probably to Richmond. Okay, if you can think maybe how it would have been I don't know how it was exactly in Richmond, but I'm suspecting it was much more of a sleepy town or different than the central part of Washington, D.C. So you have this, they're experiencing a loss of blessing because that's where they were making their money. They were established. The implication, they were established and living their life. In the Jewish community in Rome, okay, at the height of power, okay, and they were mistreated, that mistreatment that was experienced. They lost it and they were mistreated. There was no reason legally for them to be expelled. They had done nothing wrong, okay? Now Priscilla, along with her husband, is an example of someone who has wrong done to them, but they don't go wrong when wrong is done. The saying we use sometimes is when things go wrong, don't go wrong with them. Okay? And I will tell you, in my experience with my mother and my wife, these are two ladies that had things occur that were not what they should have been. I don't know about my mother. I know she had trauma in her life as a younger child. I don't know what it was. I don't ascribe thing to it. I don't want to imagine what it was because I don't know. So if I don't know, God hasn't told me, I shouldn't worry about it. But she had trauma. It was obvious in the way she talked about her childhood. She had tremendous trauma. And yet, though it affected her, it didn't derail her. Now I want to encourage you this Mother's Day night to learn from Priscilla and accept the fact that you've had probably things happen to you that were not fair and things that should not have happened to you if people had done the right thing. Now, is God sovereign? God is sovereign. Is God in control? He's in control. Did God have a purpose? He had a purpose. But you do realize that none of that does away with the pain. Doesn't make it, okay, oh, well, God had a purpose, so now my heart isn't broken. That's not true. When you're mistreated or you lose a blessing, it's hard. Can we just say that? It's difficult. You know? Never forget when Karen's mom was a wonderful lady. She was as steady as the Monday following Sunday, and she was steady in her personality and so forth. And she was the first person that close to me that died. And I had to do the funeral. One of the I wouldn't say perks, but one of the things about being the resident family pastor is you do the funeral for everybody who doesn't have pastors, or if they want you to, your family, you do it, which is fine. Glad to minister. But it was a very difficult thing for me to do because I had to do it, and I could not, because when you do funerals, you can't engage but to a certain level of the emotion of the event. Because if you do, then you can't do your thing. Okay? But she was a tremendous, but somebody came, and I was really struggling, and a relative of mine came to me and says, well, I don't know why you're so upset about the whole thing. She was a Christian. You realize the fact that she's a Christian, of course, is wonderful, but it doesn't do away with the pain. The pain is still there. Now, I want to encourage you to be okay with the fact that you wish that stuff hadn't happened to you, that did happen to you, even though God allowed it. What do you want to say? Okay? That you don't enjoy it, it's not fun, but you're not thrown off by it. That is a critical thing to keep in mind. Sometimes we don't allow ourselves to face our emotion and face the depth of anguish and anxiety and sorrow and grief about something, because by not facing it, we gloss over it with phraseology that stops us from diving into how we're feeling. Remember, of course, the reason why it's important to dive into how you're feeling is because without diving into how you're feeling, you're never going to really be able to ascertain what you're thinking. Okay? That's for another message. Overcoming the past. Second, not only did they overcome the past, okay, but second, there was flexibility in their ministry. Okay? Now let's look at verses 18, 19, and 20. We see a level of flexibility. You know the old saying, blessed are the flexible, for they will not what? Break. Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not break. So you've got to be flexible. Okay? I like the phraseology, you hold everything tightly with a loose grip. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be, and that allows you to stay steady. I got a text today from a pastor friend of mine. Says, are you having church tonight? Why would somebody ask me that question? Can you imagine? What do you think the answer is? Duh. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we always have church. We barely cancel it for a hurricane or for a snowfall. We had church when y'all all laid out because y'all was skiing and sledding, and I was at church that morning, Sunday morning. Of course, probably the foot of snow outside that made it almost impossible to get here. Maybe it's one of the reasons also you didn't come, which I understood completely, okay? But they asked me, they said, well, why? You know, they texted me. I said, yes. And they said, I'm so proud of you. I said, well, good. Now, you know why people have stopped having Sunday night services? And it's not because their church have gotten so spiritual they didn't need it. These are not churches whose members have grown so much in their walk with God that all they can take in their spiritual tank is one sermon, because to get 2 sermons in one day would give them too much, would overflow their tank, and they would like self-destruct. Okay? That's not why. It's because pastors have chosen to be dictated to by results as opposed to principle. Now, I know there's no scripture about having 2 services. It's the Lord's Day, so we have 2 services. Okay? When I'm dead and gone, you can do what you want, but until I'm dead and gone, we're going to do this what we do. Okay? And so because we want to do it. But there has to be a level of flexibility in that you have to, by the way, I wasn't upset that y'all weren't here when it snowed, okay? I really wasn't. Okay, but you have to be flexible to what happens around you without changing who you are and what you are, okay? We realize the world has changed around us since 1999 when we started Stillwaters. And we have changed in a lot of things we do. We do things better, more effectively. We have more different kinds of ministries. We have adapted to and be more effective in many different ways. But basically what we are now is what we were then, okay? You have to adapt, get flexible though, to the changes that come around you. So 3 things to write down. Write these 3 things down we'll talk about. First of all, there has to be adaptation, okay? Second, limitations. And third, to be unmovable. And that's what we have in verses 18, 19, 20. So verse 18, and Paul, after he tarried there a good while, and then took his leave of the brethren, he sailed to Syria, and he took Priscilla and Aquila with him. So now they've made this one move. They've taken the family out of Rome to Corinth, and now Paul wants to go again to another place, and what they adapt. They adapt to the change, okay? And you have to adapt to the changes God brings in your way, okay? You know, and so there's got to be adaptation in the way in what God has you doing. We don't do the same thing all the time. Everybody's ministry changes, okay? But look at the limitations. And he came to Ephesus to watch us and left them there, and he himself entered into the synagogue and reasoned with them. So though they did go to Ephesus with him, they accepted the fact they couldn't do everything, so there were limitations. So this flexibility in their ministry philosophy was, I'll adapt and to take the next opportunity God has for me, but I'm also going to accept the limitations. I can't do everything. Okay? I've never seen a person qualified to be a deacon get upset if they weren't asked to be a deacon. Never had. Never had somebody that was qualified to be in a leadership position. They got angry if they weren't asked to be in that leadership position. Because true leaders simply want the success of the group, okay? Whatever part they're of. So you accept the limitations. But there's a level of being unmovable. Look at verse 20. And when they desired him to tarry longer time, and then he consented not, but bade them farewell, saying, I must by all means keep the feast in Jerusalem. This is Paul leaving. Okay? Now, Paul's going to leave, but Priscilla and Aquila are going to stay there in Ephesus. Okay? And they're going to stay there, and let me give you these 2 references. In 1 Corinthians 16:19, 1 Corinthians 16:19 is 5 to 6 years after these events. Priscilla and Aquila are still in Ephesus. In the book of 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 19, just mentioning Priscilla and Aquila again, is 14 to 15 years after this. And they're still in Ephesus. They are unmovable. They're just doing what God would have them to do. That's it. Now, I want to encourage you, okay, that God knows how to lead you. God knows how to move you, to change you, whatever, if he wants to change. As you get older, okay, if you get old enough, you're going to realize that you know, like I mentioned a couple of days, you're going to get to the point where the dates you see in all those news articles, so-and-so died, and you see their birth date and death date, and you realize that they're eerily getting closer to your numbers, okay, or becoming lower than your numbers. And you think, well, I've been moved to the front of the class, haven't I? I'm in the front rows here, okay? Because, you know, when you're born, you're in the back row. You got your parents, your uncles, your aunts, your grandparents, everybody's in front of you. But over time, they all take the train, and then you get moved up. And if you live long enough, like Ann Iris is 100 in 2 weeks, she's on the platform. She's waiting for the train, you know. She's 100. What's her 5-year plan, okay, when you're 100? I don't know if you have a 5-year plan. I don't know. Maybe a 5-minute plan, but you're 100. Okay? I'm sorry, let's move on. Okay, but the point is, okay, don't get sidetracked with that kind of stuff. Just be unmovable and swing it at the pitch that's in front of you, if you want to use that analogy. Just live the day. Sufficient today, just enjoy the day, do your part, do what you're doing, and God has his plan, but you be unmovable. Just stay faithful. And just enjoy the ride. Because you realize it's a choice you make to enjoy the ride. It is what it is. Oh, I got problems. Well, it's because you're breathing. Once you stop breathing, all your problems will be gone. So don't worry about it. They'll be gone soon enough. Okay? Just enjoy. That's part of it. Some days it goes great. That's wonderful, wonderful. There's a guy, I'm not going to point in one direction, but there's a guy here today that I want him to get saved. I hope he gets saved. I'm going to call him tomorrow and try to get coffee with him. I hope he heard enough gospel a day to save 100 people. I hope he got saved. And I want him to get saved. And I'm praying he gets saved. I can't make him get saved. I can do my best to help him. Right? But that's in God's hands. Okay? And your life is in God's hands. So tomorrow, the alarm goes off, if you have an alarm. And you get up. And you get dressed, and you go do your thing, whatever it may be. And you just embrace the day. What about Tuesday? Well, Tuesday, you do what he asks for you Tuesday. But you just stay unmovable in the call of God upon your life until he makes changes in your life, okay? So, here's the last one very quickly, and that is there was a commitment to discipleship. And I want to challenge you about that. The last few verses in chapter 8, 19, verses 24 down to verse 28. Because here you have the story of Priscilla and Aquila, okay, ministering to the Apollos, verse 24, and certainly the Jew named Apollos, born of Alexander, which is a city of great education and learning, an eloquent man. Those two phrases, born at Alexander and an eloquent man, go together, and mighty in the scriptures. Came down. So this guy was like the doctor, what's his face? You know, the thing, the man, okay? This man was instructed in the way of the Lord and being fervent. That's a man committed in the Spirit. He spake and taught diligently the things of the Lord. Okay. Now, up to that point, you think you've got like, you know, Billy Graham as an evangelist guy and the smartest intellectual defender of the faith you can imagine. Put them two together, and that's what you have here. But notice the next phrase: knowing only the baptism of John. Okay. So you have to remember that back in these days, okay, people responded to the truth they had. So he, in all of his learning, he hadn't Googled Jesus Christ. He didn't go, to Google AI and figure out. He knew what he knew. He knew the Old Testament, and he knew about John's baptism, repentance, the Messiah was coming. He knew Jesus was coming, but he didn't understand the whole ball of wax. Okay? But notice what happens here, okay, in the following verses, okay? And he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom, when Aquila and Priscilla had heard it, they took him unto them and expounded unto him the way of the God. Now, who did? They both did. Because she was involved in the ministry of discipleship. You understand, ladies, the fact that you can't pastor and preach does not mean you can't talk to a guy in a proper setting and help him to see what he needs to see. Okay? If you're married, obviously with your husband, but in the proper context, and you all know that. We don't need to go down that path. We all know there's propriety to this. You're not going to have coffee with a guy, like this, there are boundaries you keep for other reasons, but that notwithstanding, it doesn't mean you don't do anything. But you're committed to discipleship. Obviously, in the book of Titus, you certainly should be that way to each other. You women need to help each other. When people come to counsel with Karen and I, locally or out-of-town people, I often say, well, the women love talking to Karen because she's so much better than I am. At least that's what they tell me. And that is true. They'll come to me often and say, I've had 2 or 3 sessions with them, about Tuesday or Wednesday sometimes, they'll talk to Karen, they'll come back and say, she's actually quite better than you, and she's actually good at this. And now what they mean is, well, she is better probably, but she can talk to them in ways that a woman can talk to a woman that a guy saying the very same thing could not say and have the same impact. Okay? But for whatever reason, God uses them. So God uses us all differently. Okay? And so you women need to understand that you have a role here at Still Waters to help other women and to help other people in the right context. Okay? Always guarding yourself, making sure there's propriety and a boundary and protection, but that you always that she was involved in this ministry. Okay? So 3 things to write down, then we'll land the plane. Okay? I know it's Mother's Day night, so let's do this. Okay? First of all, there's an acceptance in verses 24 to 25. That when you're going to disciple somebody, you have to accept where they are, and they did that with him. He only knew the baptism of John. They didn't come to him and say, oh, you're just such a stupid person. Shut up and quit talking. They didn't say that. They took him where they were. When you're going to disciple somebody, you're not going to disciple somebody if you're belittling them, if you're tearing them down. Okay? And you have to be careful. It can happen. I was talking to somebody the other day. I used a word I didn't mean. I mean, it wasn't a cuss word or anything, but I used a word I've used before. But in second hindsight, the word communicates something I did not mean to communicate, but it did communicate to the person I was talking to. So as soon as I realized that this morning I learned it, I sent them a text. I have a chance to talk to them. Hopefully tomorrow I will. And say, oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize for this because I did not want to offend you by using the word. What I said was true, but the word was not the best particular word to use. Okay? But the point I'm saying is this, that you have to accept people as they are. You don't make them change before you disciple them. Second, there is instruction in verse 26. They instructed them, and he gave them what they needed. But then third, there was the opportunity to launch them to go further. There wasn't a codependency here, where some people like to disciple others to make them codependent upon themselves so I can be the Messiah in this picture. That you always have to come and talk to me. I don't want to do that. Okay? My job is to help you define your fulfilledness and wholeness in Christ. Okay? And so he launches them out in verse 27, 28. And when he was disposed to pass by, I get it, and he goes on to his ministry. They launch him out. Okay? They don't keep him there. Okay? And so when you're discipling somebody, this is what they did. They accepted them, they instructed them, and then they let them go. They pushed them, to encourage them to move forward out. Okay? So, young lions that are born, how old are they before they start hunting with the main group? How many months, you think? 6 months. I watched a documentary the other day. That's why I know that. I got a documentary on hippopotamuses. Now, why I watched one on hippopotamus, I have no idea. But the word hippopotamus came to my mind, so I said, I want to see a documentary on it. So I watched it and talked about lions. I'm not sure what that meant, but anyhow, let's move on. But the point is, in 6 months, you got a bunch of money. So you see the little, oh, that's a cute little cub, and the mama is worried about that. But in a few months, she don't want him around at all. She wants him to go catch something, a thingamajigger, so they can all have dinner. Okay? Discipleship is not an end in and of itself. It is a means to an end of pushing people forward. You got to make sure that when you're discipling people, that's what you're doing. Okay? All right.